to redound to someone's praise. And so we have to guard our tongue, practice listening before speaking, try to help with our words and don't make it worse. Count to 10 if you're in a heated discussion before you reply. And sometimes the most appropriate thing to do is to not say anything at all. We are on paragraph 264. Luther says in the third place, the first place was we apply this commandment first in courts and in civil jurisdictions of telling the truth if asked to testify. The second place is as regards the name of a Christian, true Christian doctrine. What is the reputation of Christianity? We want it to be a good reputation, but unfortunately the world usually slanders Christians, looks for the worst in us, has the worst opinion about what we teach, etc. So we're slandered by the world, and there's no surprise there. So that's the first. The second place. In the third place, which concerns us all, this commandment forbids all sins of the tongue by which we may injure or confront our neighbor. To bear false witness is nothing else than a work of the tongue. Now, God prohibits whatever is done with the tongue against a fellow man. This applies to false preachers with their doctrine and blasphemy, false judges and witnesses with their verdict, or outside of court by lying and speaking evil. Here belongs particularly the detestable, shameful vice of speaking behind a person's back and slandering, to which the devil spurs us on, and of which much could be said. For it is a common evil plague, gossip, slander, a common evil plague that everyone prefers hearing evil more than hearing good about his neighbor. We ourselves are so bad that we cannot allow anyone to say anything bad about us. Everyone would much prefer that all the world should speak of him in glowing terms, and yet we cannot bear that the best is spoken about others. To avoid this vice, we should note that no one is allowed publicly to judge and reprove his neighbor, even though he may see him sin, unless he has a command to judge and to reprove. There is a great difference between these two things, judging sin and knowing about sin. You may indeed know about it, but you are not to judge it. Here Matthew 7, 1 and 2 is referenced. Judge not that you be not judged. For with what judgment you judge, you will be judged. And with the same measure you use, it will be measured back to you. And as an example of judging with the wrong measure, verse 3 talks about why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye and cannot see that you have a log in your own. I can indeed see and hear that my neighbor sins, but I have no command to report it to others. Now, if I rush in, judging and passing sentence, I fall into a sin that is greater than his. But if you know about it, do nothing other than turn your ears into a grave and cover it, until you are appointed to be judge and to punish by virtue of your office. Luther's getting at the fact that to avoid gross sins, there are laws in place and an order established for a public judgment. And that is so reproof can be rightly administered and harnessed. We might go to the extreme. It was just me acting as an individual against somebody who beat his dog or whatever. So Luther says there are official channels for this reproof to be offered. Boards, commissions, judges, courts, that kind of thing. And so he says, we may indeed know about it personally, but we're not to judge it publicly without an office. Here again, it's not that we don't recognize sin. We do by the Holy Spirit. He gives us discretion in knowing what is right and what's wrong. And John 7:24, do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment. And a righteous judgment is, keep your mouth shut unless you have the office to do it. Or if you want to talk about it with an individual, do that with that individual. If you want to know the truth about a person or event, we need always to talk to those, to him or her, to get their story. And even then you might not have an office to do anything about it. But John here, we have to be personally discerning, and it's commanded of us, and we're given the Holy Spirit to do it. But public distinguishing, personal discernment is commanded. Public distinguishing of it is not commanded to all, lest we slander. Paragraph 267. People are called slanderers who are not content with knowing a thing, but go on to assume jurisdiction. When they know about a slight offense committed by another person, they carry it into every corner. They are delighted and tickled that they can stir up another's displeasure, just as swine delight to roll themselves in the dirt and root in it with the snout. This is nothing other than meddling with God's judgment and office, and pronouncing sentence and punishment with the most severe verdict. For no judge can punish to a higher degree, nor go farther than to say, that person is a thief, a murderer, a traitor, and so on. Therefore, whoever presumes to say the same things about his neighbor goes just as far as the emperor and all governments. For although you do not wield the sword, you use your poisonous tongue, as one, to shame and hurt your neighbor. He goes just as far as government does. And of course, there's many scriptural examples of slander. David's son Absalom slandered his father, saying that David had no time nor the will to hear your complaints. He won't give you justice, but I would if I had his office. And so Absalom publicly slandered. Now, if he had a problem, of course he was jealous of his dad, wanted the office and the power. But if he really had a problem with his father's administration of his kingship, he should have gone through the right channels. That's what we're supposed to do. Maybe have gone to talk to the priest or to Nathan the prophet about his dad. Well, of course, talk to Dad personally too. Well, we'll go on to 269. God therefore would have such behavior banned that anyone should speak evil of another person, even though that person is guilty, and the latter knows it well, much less if anyone does not know it and has the story only from hearsay. But you say, shall I not say something if it is the truth? Answer, why do you not make your accusation to regular judges? I cannot prove it publicly. and so I might be silenced and turned away in a harsh manner. Ah, indeed. Do you smell the roast? If you do not trust yourself to stand before the proper authorities and to answer well, then hold your tongue. But if you know about it, know it for yourself and not for another. For if you tell the matter to others, although it is true, you will look like a liar because you cannot prove it. Besides, you are acting like a rascal. We should never deprive anyone of his honor or good name unless it is first taken away from him publicly. False witness, then, is everything that cannot be properly proved. And that's an entire section, number 271. 272 starts right away after that sentence, and I think it's important. Its importance is illustrated by the fact it's given its own reference, its own little paragraph notation. False witness then is everything that cannot be properly proved. No one shall make public or declare for truth what is not obvious by sufficient evidence. In short, whatever is secret should be allowed to remain secret, or at any rate should be secretly rebuked, as we shall hear. Therefore, if you meet an idle tongue that betrays and slanders someone, contradict such a person promptly to his face, so he may blush. Then many a person will hold his tongue who otherwise would bring some poor man into bad repute, from which he could not easily free himself. For honor and a good name are easily taken away, but not easily restored. So you see that it is directly forbidden to speak any evil of our neighbor. However, the civil government, preachers, father and mother, are not forbidden to speak out. This is based on the understanding that this commandment does not allow evil to go unpunished. In other words, the commandment doesn't excuse people from doing evil. Like, you can't say anything about it. I'm going to go and steal your car. You can't do anything about it. That's not what this commandment means. In the fifth commandment, no one is to be injured in body, and yet Master Hans, the executioner, is excluded from this rule. He can injure in body. By virtue of his office, he does his neighbor no good, but only evil and harm. Nevertheless, he does not sin against God's commandment. God has instituted that office on his own account. God has reserved punishment for his own good pleasure, as he threatens in the first commandment. Well, in the same way, although no one has a personal right to judge and condemn anybody, yet if those who serve in offices of judgment fail to judge, they sin just as surely as a person who would act on his own accord without such an office. For in matters of justice, necessity requires one to speak of the evil, to prefer charges, to investigate, and to testify. This is no different from the case of a doctor who is sometimes compelled to examine and handle the private parts of the patient whom he is to cure. In the same way, governments, father and mother, brothers and sisters, and other good friends are under obligation to one another to rebuke evil wherever it is needful and profitable. So if you have an office, exert that office. You're given an office for a reason. So this commandment to bridle the tongue does not allow evil to go unpunished, Luther says, but ensures that there is evil behind what the tongue says, or what was done to bring about an accusation or a judgment. It ensures that there is evil, and not just rumor. So if you have a vocation, you can do that which others can't. You can harm people, like an execution, or a judge who puts you in jail. So what is not normal or allowed for some, like Luther mentions touching the genitalia, it is normal if you have the office, if you're a doctor. And we know that we, as Christians, one another, we are to be our brother's keeper, and that might mean to confront somebody. In Luke 17:3, take heed to yourselves. If your brother sins against you, rebuke him, and if he repents, forgive him. And Jesus, of course, often did rebuke. He rebuked the disciples who defamed, who slandered the woman who brought perfume to him in Bethany, I guess it was. Was it at Lazarus' place? I can't remember. But anyway, of course, the disciples were annoyed at this woman who anointed Jesus with costly oil that could have been sold and given to the poor, etc. But Jesus defended her wisdom and devotion. And as regards matters of truth, it has always been that 2 or more witnesses are required to establish truth. And if you can't find them, then you can't establish truth. That ensures reliability, accuracy. Of course, people can lie, but and we'll talk more here. Forget where I ended here. Maybe 276. The true way in this matter would be to keep the order in the gospel. In Matthew chapter 18, Christ says, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. First step of discipline. Here you have a precious and excellent teaching for governing well the tongue, which is to be carefully kept against this detestable misuse. Let this then be your rule, that you do not too quickly spread evil about your neighbor and slander him to others. Instead, admonish him privately, that he may amend his life. Likewise, if someone reports to you that this or that person has done what this or that person has done, teach him too to go and admonish that person personally, if he has seen the deed himself. But if he has not seen it, then let him hold his tongue. God is a merciful God, doesn't want our reputation ruined. And so private shame, if you've done something wrong, need not lead to public blame. Private sin can and should be handled wherever possible privately. Public sin can be handled publicly, but need not be. It can be handled privately too, and that's preferred. James says in chapter 5, brethren, if anyone among you wanders from the truth, here specifically doctrinal truth, but applicable to any kind of truth versus lie. If anyone wanders and someone turns him back, let him know that he has turned a sinner from the error of his way and will save a soul from death and cover a multitude of sins. And certainly there's a multitude of sins out there that we note and combat in ourselves, and sometimes have to correct in the avenues that God gives us. Life is a battle against the master of the half-truth, Satan. The master of the innuendo. And we have to be especially on our toes about this commandment and our neighbor's good name. Well, there's quite a bit more here too, and so we're going to hold off and maybe talk a little bit more about Matthew 18 next time. We ended at 277. Any comments or questions? The Lord be with you.
And also with you.